Welcome to Beyond the Call, where history, leadership, and heroism come alive. Today's story explores Staff Sergeant George John Hall at Anzio in 1944, a powerful account of courage and responsibility in combat. If you enjoy learning more about military history and extraordinary individuals, you can find more articles, podcasts, and resources at trackpads.com. The fields near Anzio in the spring of 1944 were bare and unforgiving, broken only by shallow furrows and low rises in the soil. On the morning of the attack, Hall and the men of his company stepped off across that open ground into a storm of German machine gun and rifle fire. Within moments, the advance stalled as the company was driven to the earth, pinned flat by overlapping streams of bullets that swept every attempt to move. The ground offered almost no cover. What Hall saw from his place in the line was simple and grim. If no one silenced those guns, his men would be cut down where they lay. Before that day in Italy, Hall had been a young man from Stoneham, Massachusetts, born in 1920 and shaped by the lean years of the Great Depression. In a small New England town, he learned early what it meant to work hard, look out for family, and carry more than his share when times were difficult. When the United States went to war, he joined the Army and trained as an infantryman, mastering the skills of moving under fire, reading terrain, and keeping a squad together when cold, hungry, and exhausted. He eventually joined the 135th Infantry Regiment of the 34th Infantry Division, an outfit already hardened by brutal fighting in North Africa and Italy. Beyond the Call is the Monday feature of Dispatch, U.S. Military History magazine. By 1944, Hall had become a staff sergeant known for steady reliability and quiet responsibility for his men. That morning near Anzio, his company was ordered to attack across farmland toward German positions that had been carefully prepared to cover likely avenues of approach. As the Americans moved out, enemy machine guns and snipers opened fire, locking the company in place on the exposed slope. The platoon leaders could not stand to point out targets without drawing a fresh burst of fire, and radio messages fought to be heard over the noise of automatic weapons and exploding shells. Hall realized that 3 enemy machine gun nests, supported by riflemen, were the key to the deadly field in front of them. If those guns stayed in place, the attack would fail, and the casualties would mount with every passing minute. From his position, Hall noticed one small advantage in an otherwise hopeless landscape: a plowed furrow that curved toward the enemy line like a shallow trench. It was not much, but it was the only strip of ground that offered even a little protection. No one ordered him to move, and there was no guarantee that he could make it alive. He knew that the safer choice was to stay pressed into the earth and hope for artillery or some other solution. Instead, he made a different decision. He slid into the furrow and began to crawl forward alone, accepting that each yard gained came under the shadow of enemy guns. The crawl was slow and punishing, the soil rough against his hands and knees as bullets snapped overhead and smacked into the ground on either side. Hall hugged the thin cover of the furrow, pausing when fire swept too close, inching forward when the enemy shifted their aim. When he judged that he was close enough to the first machine gun nest, he reached for a grenade, pulled the pin, and rose just high enough to throw. It was a moment measured in heartbeats and driven by trust in his own timing. The grenade landed true, and the explosion silenced the first gun, giving the pinned Americans their first narrow opening of the day. There was no time to celebrate or even breathe. Almost at once, the second gun shifted its fire toward the area where Hall had appeared, raking the soil around the furrow and searching for the lone attacker who had destroyed its partner. Hall pressed himself lower into the earth and began the crawl again, moving from one shallow dip in the ground to the next while the enemy scoured the field. The risk increased with every yard. He knew that his men were watching and that some were already wounded, counting on someone to change the balance. When he drew near the second position, He repeated the same deadly sequence, exposing himself just long enough to send another grenade into the enemy nest and blast it out of action. The third machine gun was the hardest target of all, placed farther away and well-positioned to dominate the open ground. By now, the German crew was fully alert to the threat and poured a furious stream of bullets into the area around the furrow, trying to catch the attacker before he could close the distance again. Hall kept moving, inch by inch. His world narrowed to the strip of soil in front of his face and the weight of the last grenade at his side. He had already done far more than anyone could have asked. Yet he understood that leaving one gun in place would still endanger his company. He refused to stop. As he prepared to throw, a burst of fire struck him and shattered his right arm, sending pain and shock through his body. In that instant, with his dominant arm ruined and a live grenade still in his hand, Hall faced a choice that few can imagine. Dropping the grenade or freezing in place could mean death for himself and those nearby. Somehow, he managed to hold on to it long enough to shift it to his left hand, working through agony and the growing weakness of blood loss. With that last reserve of strength, he rose once more and released the grenade toward the final nest. The explosion destroyed the third gun and its crew, breaking the chain of fire that had pinned his company to the ground and opening the way for the attack to continue. The official Medal of Honor citation later described Hall's conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty. In simpler words, it recognized that he knowingly advanced alone into concentrated enemy fire to destroy positions that everyone understood were almost impossible to reach. When the citation notes that he advanced repeatedly over open terrain, it points back to that shallow furrow and the bare field around it, to the reality that there was no deep trench or stone wall to hide behind. Hall's choice was to risk his life again and again in a place designed to kill anyone who tried to move forward. The formal language preserves this truth in a few careful lines. The citation also emphasizes that Hall continued his assault after being severely wounded, carrying on despite the shattering of his right arm. This is where the idea of intrepidity becomes tangible, moving from a word on paper to a scene on the battlefield. He did not stop when his body gave way. Instead, he found a way to complete the task with his remaining strength, knowing that it would likely cost him dearly in the long term. The wound he suffered would lead to the loss of his arm and mark every day of his life after the war. His determination in those final moments of the fight turned official phrases like selfless devotion into lived reality. On that day near Anzio, the immediate result of Hall's actions was clear and decisive. 3 enemy machine gun positions that had dominated the field were wiped out, allowing his company to rise from the dirt, bring their wounded back, and push forward toward their objectives. Without his assault, the attack might have faltered, and the casualty count could have climbed with each attempt to move. Every small unit in that offensive depended on individuals like Hall to break open strongpoints that artillery and planning alone could not reach. His courage changed the outcome of that particular fight. The impact also extended beyond tactics and terrain. Within his company, Hall's decision under fire reinforced the bond of trust that holds combat units together. His men saw a leader who did not remain behind them in safety, but went forward alone when the need arose. That knowledge shapes how soldiers feel about their commanders and about one another. It builds a culture in which no one is left to face danger without support, and where responsibility for others sometimes means accepting terrible risk. His example gave his comrades a story they could carry as proof that their lives mattered to those beside them. Hall did not leave the war unchanged. The wound that took his right arm transformed everyday tasks into fresh challenges and turned small acts of independence into victories of patience and adaptation. Like many veterans who returned with visible and invisible scars, he had to build a new life that made room for both pride in service and the costs of combat. The Medal of Honor placed his name among a small group of men whose courage shaped the course of the war in ways large and small. Yet, for those who knew him, he remained not only a decorated hero, but a fellow soldier and citizen who had done all he could when it mattered most. Today, George John Hall's legacy lives on in the official rolls of Medal of Honor recipients, in regimental histories, and in the memories preserved by museums and educators who study the Italian campaign. His story is told whenever people look closely at the battles around Anzio and ask how troops endured such brutal conditions. His grave and any memorials connected to his name give families and communities a place to connect past and present to see the human face behind engraved letters. For many, though, his legacy survives most powerfully in narratives like this one, which restore the texture of the ground, the sound of gunfire, and the weight of decisions that last only seconds. Remembering him as more than a name and a citation honors both his sacrifice and the lives he fought to protect.